information that and I just heard, I think this is a fact because I heard it on the heard it on one of the news stations. So I'm just recording facts. As everybody knows, the NAACP is nonpartisan organization, but we advocate for legislation and things of that nature that's good for everyone. That's good for the majority of the country and people involved. But one piece of information that I heard on the news, and please fact check me, but it was very disheartening. It was concerning the governor in Florida. From what I remember from the newscast, he has his own personal map of how he wants to redesign the voting districts in Florida, which would dissect Val Deming's area of influence, which pretty much would perhaps cause her not to be reelected. And I share that piece of news that I heard because it's what's happening all across the country, that same kind of thing. This news commentator went further to say that their opinion was that his motive was so that he could in the future run as a candidate for president. So we at the Maricopa County branch of the NAACP are very concerned about democracy, saving our democracy, and helping advocate for bills and legislation that helps everyone. And with that, I will turn it over to our parliamentarian, Patrick Brown, who will give us a update on the redistricting that's going on here in Arizona and some of our voter registration bills. And we need everyone to be aware of how to make sure they do not get purged from the voting polls records. So Patrick, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Patrick Brown. I serve as the parliamentarian here with the branch, and I'm going to talk through a couple of things that are going on. We're going to talk about Arizona redistricting, and we're going to talk about the anti-democracy bills that we're seeing in the Arizona legislature. And just before I get into my coverage here, one thing to definitely kind of understand is this is a conversation we need to have with all of our circles, with our friends, our family. You know, folks, you kind of may have heard the term, I'm not political, but here's the reality is that politics impacts every aspect of our life. And we're not saying that, you have to be for one particular ideology or another, but you need to, be engaged in the process. And so, the information that you get from this meeting, please share it, with, your friends, your families. We're recording this meeting. And so if you're subscribed to our newsletter, you'll be able to get a copy of this recording so that, you can, not have to memorize everything I say, but you'll be able to share that information. So one thing, because
you can't memorize it because Patrick talks so fast, you won't be able to memorize it. So good thing it's being recorded. Okay. And Patrick, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but also I forgot to introduce Dr. Westenberg, who is the chair of our Political Action Committee. So Patrick is our parliamentarian, and he also serves on our Political Action Committee. So back to you, Patrick. Slow down. Don't talk so
okay. Fast. Yeah, it's a lot of information. Sometimes I get into my space and start going a mile a minute. So here's the thing. If I'm going to try and make sure that if I get in any technical stuff, I've defined it. If you have questions as I'm going, please drop them in the chat. I'll make sure to kind of, pause to either answer those questions, assuming I'm not going to just answer it straight up, as I go through the presentation. And then of course, we're going to take some moments where I'll just take some questions from the audience here as we go. So the thing is, don't feel like, there are no bad questions, because this is important stuff for everybody to understand. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And like I said, we can have, that way it's visual while I'm talking. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about redistricting. So every 10 years, we do a census. And what comes out of the data of that census is, we have to do reapportionment. So at the federal level, we have to decide, okay, how many U.S. House seats are going to be distributed amongst the nation based on the population. You drill that down a bit, and of course, states, then you have to say, okay, here's what our population is. We have to determine, how we want to divide up our legislative districts, our precincts, our voting districts, things of that nature within the state. Every state has a different way of doing it. To use Dr. Hardin's example, in Florida, it's a function of the state legislature, meaning the Florida legislature puts a commission together to do that. That's where we see, depending on the state, and who might be in the majority in that state, at least with politically, that's where you can see things like gerrymandering. Like, for example, let's talk about Texas. Texas puts a commission together that's appointed by the Texas governor, and they determine what those lines are. And that's where we're seeing all sorts of gerrymandering and things of that nature, where they're either trying to cut up, the lines in a way that diminishes one support, or, increases the voting power, political power of another group type of thing. In Arizona, we do things a little bit differently here. We have what's called the Independent Redistricting Commission. So this is really only 20 years old. So in political years is really, really young. This is only really the second time that Arizona has used this process. First time being, in 2000 or 2000 to 2010. And then of course, now we're in 2010 to 2020. So how this works is that this commission is made up of 2 Republican members, 2 Democratic members, and the individual who is the chair of the commission is an independent, meaning they are not aligned to either political party. It is their job to then take the data that comes from the census, and then using the laws on our books to then determine how to create the new legislative districts within the state, as well as the congressional districts as well. So they follow a couple of different criteria, and I'm going to kind of give you guys kind of the basics behind it, but basically look at what's called competitiveness. This is the how competitive each area should be. They look at what's called communities of interest. So communities of interest is defined as communities that share, kind of common traits. This could be geographic, it could be ethnic, it could be, socioeconomic. There's a lot of factors that goes into the shared the communities of interest. They also look at the proportionment of legislative districts. So basically, for one, say, legislator for every 100 or so thousand folks who are within a district. So they use all of that to kind of carve out the districts. Throughout, now, I want to be very clear. If you're wondering, well, how do I, participate in this process? It's done. As of, I want to say yesterday, the IRC has already certified the map. So now things are starting to happen where everything's going to start kicking in. I'll explain that as I go through here. But one thing I want you to understand is it's kind of, and this is kind of an unfortunate phrase, but it's said a lot. This is one of the most important things in Arizona that a lot of people either don't understand or don't pay attention to until after it's done. Some of that, like I said, I'm just trying to keep my own personal commentary to a minimum, but some of that has to do with the IRC not being very strong with publicizing this information, of really kind of, like, for example, there was a critique that they didn't have a public information officer, someone who would, whose job would be to push this information out to the general public. They did have social media, but I mean, I followed it, but it really wasn't, all that engaging, or they didn't really post a whole lot. So it was really incumbent on individuals who are engaged in these type of processes, either politically or whatnot, to really kind of push the information. Participating in stuff is fairly easy, but again, I don't want to rehash what's already closed. I'm going to focus a little bit more on kind of what's going to be happening next, so everyone's kind of prepared for it. So let's talk about the timeline of how things went down. So back in September of 2021, the IRC put together what's called the grid maps. And so those are just the basic maps where they just say, okay, we're going to look at the population and we're going to carve up the state so that basically it's all equal. Doesn't matter any of the other rules. That's kind of their starting point. Then what they do is they open it up to public review. So that's where you, the general public, can provide input to, say, okay, well, I'm looking at this map and this cuts me out, or this doesn't make any sense because now there's a mountain dividing like my community or what have you. And so they start narrowing it down. After they narrow it down in October, they do a draft adoption, which is say, okay, this is basically what we're going to start with and we want, feedback on. It goes into November where people are commenting, they're making adjustments, they're releasing new maps that kind of show that progress. By December is when they release a finalized map, which is kind of close to what it's going to be. And then around the end of December, they say, okay, here is, the final map that we're considering as a commission. We're going to open it up for 30 days for people to provide comments, and we'll make tweaks and everything like that. So kind of what we just came out of is that the IRC has basically they had completed the 30 days. They had gotten feedback, and kind of part of the delay, because they said they were going to do this like last week, but they ended up doing it this week, mainly because what's happening is they were just making like small adjustments or revisions. Things like, say, you have one district that is cut off by like a highway, or the numbers don't add up quite right. So they kind of made a little shuffling to try and make certain things work. I wouldn't necessarily call them some significant changes, but mainly just kind of small tweaks just to get it kind of finalized. And so now what's happening is the counties around the state are basically voting to approve these maps. Maricopa County, of course, did it this past week. And of course, the other counties are slowly saying, okay, yeah, we're good. We're not going to object to what's happening. Now, I wrote this before the announcement came. So when it says maps are still pending, that's not true anymore. So just want to clear that up. So yeah, the first bullet, just ignore, because like I said, that's now out of date. One thing that can happen that can impact a process are lawsuits. Folks can sue because they can say, well, these maps don't, meet the criteria for whatever reason. As of this time, no one is suing. So there are no lawsuits pending. However, that doesn't mean by Monday or Tuesday a lawsuit is filed. Basically, and I'll explain kind of what happens in the situation of a lawsuit a little bit later, so I won't get into that right here. But I will say it's barring any kind of process to stop anything like a lawsuit or injunction or anything of that nature. Our districts and these are state legislative districts, they must reorganize within 30 days after the map certification. So whatever district assignment, I'll give you an example. So I currently live in legislative district 27. What has to happen now these maps are certified is in 30 days, legislative district 27 will then reorganize into its new district, which will be district 11. And so a couple of things happen. If you're a representative in that district, then for the time being, you're going to be, representing a new district. You wouldn't be the representative of district 27, you'd be the district representative of district 11. If you are running for office, then you're not going to be running for office for, say, legislature of district 27, you're going to be running for office for the new district. If you are active in a political organization, like say the Democratic Party or Republican Party, and you're part of like their party committee that operates out of that district, then those committees have to then dissolve and reorganize under the new legislative district. So when you trickle down a little bit further, things like voting precincts, justice courts, things like that will get adjusted. Now that'll happen kind of under the county's purview. So they have to wait for this to happen for them to make those changes. So for example, if you live in the South Mountain Justice Court, those boundaries may adjust a little bit because of this. If you live in a particular voting precinct, your voting precinct, depending on where you live, may change. And so what that really means, at least for a resident of Maricopa County, at bare minimum, voting precincts kind of don't really matter as like they used to when it came to voting, because we have things in our county where you can vote in voting centers. Then you're not necessarily having to tie to go to a particular area to vote. You can kind of vote anywhere in the county. But like I said, that's kind of a different conversation. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. Before I move on, are there any questions? Check the chat here. Okay, so for one question in the chat, in your opinion, does the redistricting limit voting power of people of color in Maricopa County? There's two answers to that, yes and no. I think one thing I think that you'll see when I show the maps is that it doesn't, and like I would say in statewide elections, because in statewide elections or countywide elections, it really just comes down to one person, one vote. Where things could get interesting is depending on where you live in regards to your to things where it's tied to that district. So if you live in a particular district, depending on how it's cut, it could impact those communities. I know, for example, on the west side, there was a lot of debate with West Phoenix, like Glendale area, because fundamentally they kind of gerrymandered those districts. So they cut them in a way which really kind of packed the district with a large number of Latino voters, but pulled them out of areas where those areas would have been more competitive. Because of a lot of, argument against that, they readjusted it so that didn't quite happen. So I would probably say in this situation, when you see the maps, it's not going to be so much of an issue. So that by itself isn't going to necessarily impact voting of people of color, beyond some of the other stuff that I'll get into when I get into the anti-democracy laws.
Well, Patrick, what do you mean when you say
what do you mean by more competitive?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, so competitive basically means they're looking at the margin of victory. They looked at all the elections from the past 10 years and they said, okay, what was the average margin of victory one way or the other? So for the IRC, they determined competitiveness as an individual winning their election by 7 points or more. So they would say a district is competitive if they said, okay, in the past 10 years with all the different elections, they look kind of more at the top of the ticket type of stuff. They'll say, okay, this person won by 7 points or fewer. That means that they are, that was considered competitive. I personally disagree with that, especially in our current day and age. If you're winning by 7 points in like these days, you're running the table on folks. But like I said, I'm not on the IRC, so that's just how they determined it. Okay, so let's get into how things kind of broke down. So what you're looking at right now is this is the congressional maps. Now, what I did is just for people to understand, these are color coded based on how strong they are, either as a Republican area or Democratic area. So for Republicans, it's in the red, Democrats are in the blue. So just to kind of give you the overall stats, overall, it kind of broke down where if we're going to say that there's a partisan advantage to the maps, it's 6-3 Republicans. So 6 would be 6, say, safe Republican districts, 3 safe Democratic districts. What that simply means is that, kind of based on the numbers, whoever were to run in that district, if they're a Democrat, they're more than likely going to win. Say you're Republican, they're more than likely going to win. If you're wondering what those specific districts are, they're for the safe Republican districts, it's congressional districts 1, 2, 5, 6, 8, and 9, and then the safe Democratic districts were 3, 4, and 7. Now, one thing I want to make a note on, if you look at the map and you see Congressional District 1, that district, when you look at the 2020 election, that district actually voted I won't say overwhelmingly, but they voted very decisively for President Biden. So that would probably, so CD1 is actually really more competitive than at least it looks like on this map. So depending on like who runs out of the district and how well they run their campaign and the voters and all that type of stuff, it is very realistic that CD1 could potentially go a different direction. Same thing with CD6. CD6 is also an area that is where the current congressperson in that district is actually a Democrat. So again, that's a district that could potentially, be a Democratic district based on just kind of some of those factors and looking at, how those areas kind of voted for in the presidential election. So even though it's a 6-3 on paper, it's, it could easily be like, a 6-5 in reality, depending on like how things go. Questions before I continue?
What district is Cinema in?
Kirsten Sinema is a senator, so she's not going to be tied to a particular
Gotcha. Yeah.
statewide office.
That's correct. So okay.
So if you're if you're kind of saying yourself like, I don't know what district I'm in or whatnot, what I'll do is kind of after I get through all this, I'll drop some resources in the chat so you can kind of figure out like where you are and those type of things. Oops. So let's talk about legislative districts. So we're going to bring this kind of more within just I would say more of the local politics type of thing. Now, I want to give you some context. So I pulled up I guess you can say at this point, the previous map. So this is what we've operated on, say, leading up to this point, prior to redistricting for the last 10 years. So how it broke down 10 years ago is that we ended up with 15 safe Republican districts, 10 safe Democratic districts, and the remaining 5 were considered competitive districts. These are those districts where basically, it was up to, it could go either way. Like I said, the entire state is broken up, obviously, into these legislative districts. This area right here, this kind of in the middle, that's Maricopa County. So that's pretty much where, we're obviously the most populous county in the state. So this is where I would argue that unless you live in like, Tucson or something and you're on this call, if you live in Maricopa County, you're going to be somewhere in here. So here's what we got out of redistricting. So this is the map that is basically what we're going to end up going with. Looking at it from a partisan lens, we have 13 safe Republican districts, 12 safe Democratic districts, and 5 competitive districts. And again, if you're wondering what is considered competitive, that's a margin of victory of 7 points or fewer. As you can see, just looking at it just from a political science lens, you can see where you say Democrats have, one fewer, kind of caught up. But again, you have those competitive districts that can kind of go either way. So it depends on the candidate, the population, voter turnout, that type of stuff. Now, the other thing, I'm going to go back to the other map just for a second, just so you have some context. If you look, the numbers have changed because part of redistricting is that they assign a new district number based on how things go. So I'm going to go with one everyone can see it. So if you look up at the top here, Legislative District 7, that's what it currently is. It's now going to be Legislative District 6 because that's just how the numbers got reassigned when they redid the maps. Now, one thing to also understand is this is not like a change from like, just your number change. Some of the boundaries and things have changed. So a person could be living in one district today, but once this stuff is all finalized, they're in a new district, depending on how the maps were cut up or changed to impact, or to impact the results of everything. So let's talk about what's going to be happening next when it comes to redistricting. So you have scenario 1. Scenario 1 is that the maps have been certified. So that part is kind of triggered. What we're looking at is in the next 30 days, the new legislative districts will then go into effect. So like I said, if you are an individual who's very involved in your political party of choice, you've probably already started hearing, okay, our district is going to be going to becoming a new number and we're going to have to do what's called reorganization and things like that. If you are someone who, is just kind of, I vote, I don't get into all of this type of stuff, I just, pay attention to the overall big picture and I vote, then what you're going to need to be aware of is in this 2022 election, you're going to hear people who are probably going to say, hey, I'm running for district, and it's going to maybe be a different number than you're used to because of redistricting. Or some of these races may get really competitive because particular candidates may have been redistricted into a different area. So people who didn't run against each other in the last 10 years may find themselves running against each other now, those type of things. From the county standpoint, we're going to see the supervisory districts redrawn. So we have five county supervisors, and they're assigned to particular areas. So those boundaries are going to adjust too. So it's possible, depending on where you live, you may end up in a new supervisor district. So your county supervisor may be a different individual as a result.
So does any notification go out to citizens about that? For example, when I look at my voter identification card, I see my congressional and legislative district, and it gives me a certain number that may have changed.
So here's the thing. Yes, notification will go out, but as we've learned that notification sometimes is very, is what is an inch long and a mile deep type of thing. So you should theoretically get information in the mail saying that, guess what, you're now, here's your new voter registration card. You're now in this district or whatnot. They of course put this stuff on websites. However, just using the past 10 years as an example, this information isn't as widely publicized as it should be. And so it really kind of falls onto organizations like ours and other organizations out to really spread the word, unless, like I said, you really kind of live in this world of this information. Okay, so let me see. So voting precincts. That's something that will be determined by the counties. So the counties will kind of make additions to the precinct. Again, where this is really going to I would say affect, say, the average human being when it comes to voting precincts is, one, if you are involved in in a political organization, this may impact how your involvement is impacted. When it comes to just straight up voting, like I said, in the past, you had to vote, your assigned voting area was based on a precinct. Currently, that is not the case in Maricopa County. You can vote anywhere that there's a vote center. So your voting precinct doesn't really matter as much as it used to. So, like, to give it a kind of a concrete example, let's say, you live in South Phoenix and your voting precinct's in South Phoenix, but you work in Scottsdale and you want to vote in person. So in Maricopa County, you can just vote at a vote center in Scottsdale and sit, not have to, say, drive all the way back home or anything like that. Or you can just mail your ballot in, or you can drop your mail-in ballot at, the post office, or at, county elections, or at the whatever vote center you want to go to that's near you. So the voting precincts matter, but when it comes just to kind of pure voting, it's not quite the same. Now, where it does impact could be things that are determined by your precinct, stuff like school board election. So school board elections, that's something that could potentially change. You might be districted out of, depending on where you live and the map and everything like that, you may be moved into a different school district. So when school board elections happen, you may say, well, I was voting for Phoenix Union School Board District, but now I don't live in that, I'm not districted in that area. So now I'm in, Tempe Union. So I'm voting on that stuff. Or who you vote for county supervisor may adjust depending on where your precinct was, cut into based on the supervisor lines. Okay. Any questions before I go into scenario 2? Check the chat here. Okay, nothing in the chat. All right. So with scenario 2.
So just in your kids may be going to one school, but you're voting in another?
You're right. And because we have open enrollment, that's actually the case. I mean, it's possible for someone to send their children to one school district, but you live in a different area where you can't vote for any of the school board members because you don't live in that particular area, but your children go to school there.
Yeah.
And that's pretty common these days, where, with open enrollment, and people, people say live in one part of town, but they send their kids to school in a district they don't live in. Or they might live in a district depending on how it's redistricted. So things could change. All right, so scenario 2 with map certification, if there's a lawsuit and that lawsuit has enough legs and we get the federal courts involved, then the maps could be delayed. And that would be a scenario where, you know, the lawsuit gets to, say, the circuit court or federal court. They say, okay, we're putting a freeze on everything until this thing gets resolved. If that were the case, that means everything that the 2010 maps, as we'll call them, that stays into effect until this gets resolved. There were lawsuits 10 years ago, but none of them got to the point where anything got stopped. Since they're, like I would say, you know, if we don't see any significant lawsuits, say in the next week and a half or so, then they're probably not going to be anything that's going to have enough legs to stop the process. So scenario 2 is becoming less and less likely to happen. All right. Before I move into the anti-democracy stuff, are there any questions from any of the attendees that I can answer on the topic of redistricting? Chat. Okay. All right. So let's talk about anti-democracy bills. The reason I'm saying anti-democracy and not voter suppression is because, frankly, we've moved into a whole new universe of this issue. I would say in the last legislative session, we saw a lot of bills that were coming out that were attacking our ability to vote. So yeah, protecting the vote was definitely accurate, and we're still trying to protect the vote, but we've kind of shifted in a whole new universe of things that are just straight up just trying to attack our democracy. We're early, we're only about, we're going into the 3rd week of the legislative session. So everything that I'm going to talk about is from at least the first 2 weeks of the session. That means that some of these bills may die in committee. Some of these bills may get adjusted or amended. Some of these bills may not actually make it to a floor vote. And there may be more coming as time goes on. If you want to stay up to date with what's happening, please make sure you are getting our emails and which also contain our weekly newsletter, where one of the sections in the newsletter has all the upcoming legislation as well as the branch's take on, you know, is this something we should support? Should this be something we oppose? And keep in mind, we're coming from a lens that this is not partisan. We're not saying be for something or against something based on party affiliation. We're putting the measuring stick to the values of the NAACP and its impact on, you know, community and rights and democracy and ours. So if a Republican comes up with something that's good, that's pro-democracy, then we're going to support it. If a Democrat comes up with something that is not pro-democracy, is not supporting that aim, we'll be against it. So we don't care what the party label is. We're looking at the actual legislation, the laws itself. If, all the bills will have these either SCR or SB. That means it comes out of the state house or the state senate, depending on, you know, the prefix. So I'm going to kind of go through these. I'm giving some really basic information. Our newsletter will have links where if you want to read these in their entirety, so you can get like the full language, you'll be able to do so, and that'll come out on Sunday. So again, I'll drop information on how to join our email list if you're not currently getting our emails. So let's talk about one of the first bills. This is SCR 1005, and this gets into federal ballot voters and identification. So the whole idea is this, is that what they want to do is pass a law that basically if you are voting, you have to show proof of citizenship at the polls. And this is for federal elections. So if you're voting in a presidential election, you have to show proof that you are an American citizen. This is actually a stricter voter ID than for anything else. So you don't have to show citizenship, you just have to prove identity normally. Here's the thing. First of all, this is clearly discriminatory. First of all, it's going to really attack people like, for example, Native Americans. Our Native American voters, for the folks, if you're not familiar, people live on Native American reservations don't necessarily have the same types of ways to prove citizenship that we do. They may not have a birth certificate. Often they have tribal IDs that are legal IDs, but they differ a little bit from, say, the rank and file, driver's license, or things like that. So ultimately, the whole purpose of this bill is to make it harder for really our native populations to vote in federal elections. If you're kind of wondering what that rationale is, our tribes turned out in record numbers in 2020. And so this bill is pretty much an attack on them and their ability to vote in federal elections. We're talking like voting for senator, president, Congress, all that type of stuff. That brings us to SB 1012. And this is to create a registration database for federal voters. Basically what this directs the Secretary of State to provide access to the voter records to the Attorney General's new Election Integrity Unit. And so really what this means is it creates a scenario where we could have a future cyber ninja organization, because they could be deputized by the Attorney General, for example, to then have access to all of our voter records. So what this is pretty much just setting up some sort of a situation where you can have somebody like Cyber Ninjas or some other organization come in to audit the votes of elections if they don't like the outcome. Of course, this is not something that we are supporting, because again, if you were following this Cyber Ninjas thing, and the Maricopa County audit was just a complete mess. This brings us to SB 1119, and this is to create electronic ballot images and make those public record. What this means is that your ballot gets to be public record, meaning that anybody can hop online and see how an individual voted, actually pull up the actual ballot. Again, this is another like Cyber Ninja-esque type of bill. What this does is just pretty much opens it up for any person with internet connection and bad intentions to scrutinize elections and have that as, public record. Now, our ballots are not public record in the sense that, I can't just go and pull the ballots from the last election. I can't do that. You all can't do that. You have to be a member, part of the elections department or some authorized individual to do that. What they're trying to do is just saying like anybody can see a ballot. So proof of citizen, what works as proof of citizenship? Birth certificate, let me see what else, passport. Anything that basically proves that you were born in the United States. So in many cases, Native American folks don't necessarily have birth certificates because they may have been born at home or born in a situation where they just don't have that type of documentation, or they have a different form. They may have like their tribal card or something like that, which is not the same as a birth certificate. So that's kind of one of those that's what kind of proof of citizenship is. Basically any legal document that proves that you were born in the United States. Okay, so let me see. We talked about this one already. And like I said, there are multiple bills that kind of a little bit of the same thing. Let me see this one. Let me see. SB 1013 directs the Secretary of State must request the federal government add state-specific instructions on the federal registration form asked for proof of citizenship. So here's the thing: the federal government does not ask for proof of citizenship when you register to vote. The state currently does not do that either. Here's the thing: the state of Arizona can't tell the Federal Elections Commission what to do. All this really is, this is like really kind of, I would call this kind of a garbage bill. It's unnecessary, it's performative. The Federal Elections Commission is under no authority to do this. And even if this were to pass, the Federal Elections Commission is not going to do it because they don't have to and they won't. And under the current administration, they're definitely not going to do it. So that brings us to SB 1133. This one is really interesting. So what this does is it prohibits cities, towns, and school districts from holding all mail elections. So for example, your school, so what we saw in this past couple of years is that for city elections, a lot of city elections did 100% vote by mail. City council elections in a lot of jurisdictions were 100% vote by mail. Same thing for school districts. What this bill would do would be to completely wipe that out. So they would not be able to do that. Impacts of this, basically, unfortunately, local elections don't have the same amount of turnout than, say, the state or federal elections do. And this will only make that worse. So it'll make it like a lot harder for a lot of people to vote because they would have to actually go to their particular precinct here's a catch. For local elections, it wouldn't be necessarily the same vote center as a state or countywide election. In that situation, let's say it's a school board vote. you would have to go to a particular precinct to vote in that election. So that whole Scottsdale, South Phoenix scenario that I mentioned earlier, that wouldn't apply. You wouldn't be able to vote in Scottsdale. You'd have to come all the way back home. Versus, well, I've got my mail-in ballot. I can drop it in the mail on my way to work, on my way home, but not have to necessarily go to a vote center or to vote. If you're in a city, and this is where, I'm going to kind of put on how this impacts Black and brown voters. Traditionally, we don't always get the appropriate amount of precincts or voting areas in some of these communities. So if that were to happen, again, this is kind of an end around suppressing a lot of local elections. So this is bad legislation. And let me see the last one, HB 2237. This is same-day voter registration prohibition. So currently, Arizona doesn't have a same-day voter registration process. It's something that people have been asking for. I think we should have, and I know something that I know the NAACP supports. However, what this is doing, this would make it against the law to do that. So they're trying to preemptively take that away, that option away. Oh, we did have one more. This is a big one. This is really scary. SB 1056. That's why I saved it for last. The worst one for the last. This addresses misplaced ballots, invalid ballots, and charging. So here's the thing. People who are poll workers, I know it's folks in this call who have been poll workers in the past. They were poll workers in the last election, previous elections. So the thing is, poll workers are typically just regular folks who are signing up for this particular job. And, it's a lot of work. It's getting real because of just a lot of the unfortunate bad behavior about folks. It's being really difficult to be a poll worker. So what this law would do is it would make the job even harder. The whole idea is that if you misplace a ballot, you could be charged with a crime, a class 2 misdemeanor. And that could be, maximum sentence could be like 4 months in jail. If a ballot is misplaced, so let's say you have a box of ballots, they don't go to the right spot, someone discovers it, say, oh, we've got these batch of ballots, we need to count. And this is all on election day. We're not talking like 6 days after the fact. Let's say this is all during election night and go, oh, we need to get these counted. Well, that could be a crime as well, potentially. So the whole idea is simply this, is that one, it'll scare folks off away from being poll workers. That's bad because we need poll workers to make sure that our election system happens efficiently. If that was kind of one of the issues in 2020 because of COVID, and a lot of poll workers often are more seasoned members of our community. A lot of them did not do this job because the risk of COVID. So the thing is, now if you throw in the potential that if you just make an honest mistake, or something like that happens, you're looking at potential jail time. There's gonna be people who are not gonna want to do this. This is bad legislation. So to kind of wrap everything up, and I'll take some questions before I'm done here. Ultimately, this is just kind of the first salvo of anti-democracy bills. As you guys are aware, we're looking at them introducing legislation to attack the mail-in voting system. They've already kind of attacked it with taking the permanent out of permanent early voting. Now there's legislation in the works that will just eliminate it entirely. We're looking at things that will, of course, impact the way folks can challenge votes, saying that, okay, well, we don't like the outcome, we want to challenge it. Things that are currently not legal. So as this stuff evolves or gets added, we'll of course get the word out. Again, I'll drop some information in the chat here once I wrap up to, if you're not currently getting our emails, you can get our emails. That way you can kind of track this stuff. Additionally, there's a great resource called Civic Engagement Beyond Voting. They're kind of one of our partners. They're a nonpartisan organization that tracks legislation as well. They also help provide me with some of the information I'm sharing with you guys as well, because they got a whole team doing this stuff, and I work with them to stay up to date and everything. They have a newsletter which is really good that breaks down a lot of this information and helps people keep up to date. And they also help people get on what's called the request to speak system. Request to speak is really awesome because as these bills are in committee, you have an opportunity to express support or opposition to those bills. Legislators do read this stuff. So it's definitely something that is a really useful tool that I think a lot of people don't take advantage of. It's all computer. You don't have to like go anywhere to utilize a request to speak. Now you do have to physically go to the Capitol to sign up. That's where our friends at Civic Engagement come in. They'll do that stuff for you. They actually have a sign up form where they'll go and get you your access, so you don't have to go down there and do that. They'll get that for you. And then that way you'll be able to use the system. One other point, and I'll go ahead and check for any more questions, is testifying at the legislature. This is something that is a big deal. Last session, because of COVID, you could testify remotely. It's turned out to be a really good thing because a lot of folks want to testify, in these committees, but either work, say disability or whatnot, making it down to the Capitol was too much of a challenge for them to do that. So they were allowing people to do it remotely. It helped because, kept people safe from COVID, allowed greater access for people to testify. Unfortunately, they have taken that away. And there's a lot of, people are trying to fight to get that back, but we'll see how that goes because the party and the majority kind of determines those rules. So currently, if you are interested in going to the Capitol to debate any of these bills or testify in these bills, you got to do it in person. But another shout out to Civic Engagement Out Voting. They do have an awesome program where they kind of help people prepare to do this because it can be kind of intimidating, especially if you have a very aggressive legislator doesn't like what you're saying. So they're really good at kind of prepping you to testify. And it's really important because it allows you to get on the record, based on some of this crazy legislation. So I'll make sure these links fall in the chat. I'll also put in the other stuff. So let's see, we got questions. So any questions, go ahead and unmute. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer what I can. Okay, thank you for your time. Like I said, I'll put some links in the chat here in just a moment. And again, spread this information. Talk to your friends and family, your coworkers. Get away with that. Yeah.
Your presentation was excellent. I did hear in between that I guess cinema was actually sanctioned. That has in the break, I heard that on the news. So that's a very good thing. Yeah, you had said that it was pending. So
so just for everybody else to give you some background. So the Arizona Democratic Party is meeting currently, and one of the things they just did is they voted to officially censor Senator Sinema based on, of course, how she decided to vote against voting rights, or at least the filibuster or whatnot. And basically what that means is the party is officially rebuking her and her actions.
Patrick, I'm hearing some feedback. I don't know if somebody's got something going in the background. Can you guys please check it? And earlier we discussed the importance of what does it mean for her to be censored. It will reduce it, Patrick, if I'm saying this correct, it will reduce how much money she gets from the current Democratic Party coffers, but she may not need it since she's getting it from other sources.
Well, Dr. Hart, one thing with that, you're right. So
what's the ramifications of the censoring?
So the most direct ramifications, obviously, the public, hit that it takes on her because, being a member of a political party provides you with, obviously some have some legitimacy to, being a candidate running for office, things like that for people, who are associated with that party. So of course, that's a big hit. If she chooses to seek re-election, should she win her primary, that diminishes the type of support that would come from the party. And that could be financial, that could be organizational, things of that nature. Now, some of the kind of the expanding results of that are organizations who may not be align to the political party, but lean to, say progressive organizations, say like Emily's List, who's already announced that they're going to be removing support. Say like a group like Planned Parenthood that traditionally supports Democratic candidates may remove their support, meaning that those organizations will then not provide money to help that individual run for office or any kind of support, or they may endorse like, their primary challenger or, whatever they choose to do. So now, as you alluded to, Dr. Harden, there's possibilities that, Sinema, is getting enough money from other sources that she just doesn't care. And, she just continues doing what she's going to do, which kind of brings it back to voting that, I'm not saying who you should vote for, what party you should be a part of, but the thing is, for the time being, and we keep doing our job, it's still one person, one vote, and taking all the information out there and making the vote that makes the most amount of sense to you. Because at the end of the day, even with all that money, she still needs people to go to the ballot box to cast a ballot.
Okay, and I would like to personally thank everyone who's on the call today. At this meeting, because it's going to take every single one of us to try to help energize our family, our friends, everybody. We need the same type of momentum that we had going into this past election. We have to do what we can do to try to get that kind of energy back again. And I would say make these conversations at the coffee table and at the dinner table, with everybody in your family, so that people are aware. I guess I don't know. I want to be optimistic, but I don't see the energy that we had going into this other, going into the past presidential election. And I think, like on TV, they just finished the Emmett Till series, right? We have to remember, it's up to us. It's our time now to carry the torch, and we cannot let all of the atrocities in the past go in vain. And remember the lives that people lost. Jewish people, white people, Black people, the lives that were lost for us trying to get the right to vote. So whatever it takes for us to keep talking this up to our family members. And I think the most critical thing is we have to learn or realize that it's all the elections that we have to look at. School board elections, everything, not just the presidential elections, because it all feeds up, So, and then let me ask Dr. Westenberg, chair of the Political Action Committee, if you have anything you want to share. And of course, Patrick, thank you very much for pulling all of this valuable information together, because that's one of the obstacles that we have to address and keep addressing is if we don't have the information, we don't know what actions to take. Right. So we have to keep informing our public. Dr. Westenberg, any comments as our Political Action Committee chair? And don't let me forget about the book club to announce our book club, Princess. Okay. If you'll announce our book club. Dr. Westenberg.
Yes, we are just at a critical time. And personally, being where I am as a more seasoned person and knowing my past and where we are today and what we are possibly going to lose, I find it absolutely unbelievable. And one of the things that we need to remember is that Arizona is a target area. Mm-hmm. A lot of what's going on across the country is coming right out of Arizona. I never shall forget when I was looking at the supposedly electors down, knocking on the door saying, let us in. And when they were counting the votes. And so, of course, we had the ninjas here. When you think in terms of January 6th, who were some of the people that we now know were there in Washington, D.C. It was Arizona. And we just really, we are a major player, okay? We're central for a lot of what's happening across the country. And so we need to really take it upon ourselves to make some noise. We have to make a lot of noise and get our people energized and let them know what's happening. When I am out every day, I look at people and sometimes I don't feel that they really know that we could potentially lose our democracy. I don't know that they really realize that. And so, yes, through this organization and other organizations with which you're affiliated, your family, please make some noise, talk about it. Get the word out there that we need to protect the vote.
Yeah. It's really scary. It's really scary, and especially like I just want to emphasize when Dr. Westenberg says about how many Arizonians were leaders of the insurrection. The insurrection, and I think the little bits of information I have is it was really significant that. Ruben Gallego, kind of what some of the things he told people, like, no, we can't leave this Capitol. If they had left the chambers, there would have been a way that they could have really taken over. It was like it was so delicate that they didn't get, that the insurrection didn't happen. And some of you that watch the news know this better than what I'm trying to say, but it had something to do with, I believe, if I have my facts straight, Gallegos kind of said, no, we can't leave the chambers, because a technicality of, had they left the chambers, I think it was like the military could have came in, and then it could have been a coup. It could have been a complete takeover.
Where did he come during the MLK holiday? Right here to have the audacity,
right?
Okay, during the MLK holiday to come to Arizona and go down there in Florence. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I'm saying is, like, I'm going to use the word intentional, because they are people who want to take away the democracy are intentionally doing things.
They are.
And if you go back and you look at the farmer rallies that were done in Tulsa, right when they were celebrating Black Wall Street, like I said, I kind of just watch the news and stuff like that. So sometimes I get so excited, I might get my facts mixed up. But what I was saying earlier about the Florida governor, I believe he made his announcement on the eve of the MLK holiday, right? So it's also, it's trying to play into upsetting and emotional, right? Taking things that we celebrate that support democracy, they are taking actions on the days to make it even worse. That's but. Okay, Princess, will you tell everybody about the book club? And I will kind of get off of my soapbox rant, okay?
Okay, again, thank you, Patrick, for that important information. It was very thorough. And, we do need to try to keep people informed. So much is happening. We're bombarded with negative actions like daily, and they're getting worse and worse related to voting. But our next book club for the Maricopa County branch is on March 22nd at 6:00 p.m. And this will be a virtual meeting. And the featured book is Just Pursuit. Just Pursuit. This is it. And it's not very long. But it's Just Pursuit, a Black Prosecutor's Fight for Fairness, and it's by Laura Coates. And Laura Coates is a current CNN legal commentator, and she's also been a federal prosecutor and has worked specializing in voter rights. She's a civil rights attorney as well. So this particular book is very timely right now. And the thing that I think is helpful about it is there are scenarios or stories about actual people and what happened to them. And one of the things she's discovered over the years is that you make assumptions about justice that don't play out in court or in the system. So that's the reason the book is chosen. So hopefully you all can join us, and we need to keep at it, and we need to keep fighting forward. So look forward to seeing you at the book club.
Great. Okay. Okay. And we'll close out with announcements. And Carlton, Michelle, Janet, any of you on the call, would you have anything you'd like to contribute to the conversation, or like to hear from Ms. Webb? Is it Webb? Let's see. Anybody? Open it up for any announcements or anything?
Good morning or good afternoon now. I don't have any questions, but thank you for letting me join you.
Okay. Okay. Look forward to seeing you next month as well, everybody. Okay. Okay. If there are no other announcements, thank you again for joining. Patrick, thanks for putting this information together. And please help us continue to fight forward so that we can, everything that our ancestors
Did we lose Dr. Harton?
Yeah, looks like.
It looks like we did.
What I will add on, oftentimes the Political Action Committee does do voter registration down on first Friday. So if anyone would be interested in participating in that, please let us know. Okay. And Princess, would you like to close out?
Sure. Again, I thank everybody for participating, and we hope to see you at our next community meeting. And of course, keep in mind the very important announcement Dr. Westenberg just made about voter registration. So thanks again, and have a pleasant afternoon.